Karen dug a lake on my land while I was deployed. I won a $480,000 restoration suit. The satellite photo on my phone made my stomach drop. My backyard, the one I left as flat Georgia clay, was now a lake. I was 3,000 miles away, halfway through a 9-month deployment, staring at a screen that didn't make sense. My name is Danny Reyes, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, and someone had turned my property into a swimming hole. Her name was Karen Whitfield, President of the Belmont Ridge Homeowners Association. My neighbor. My tormentor. Before I explain the lake, you need to understand who Karen Whitfield really is and what she's capable of. I bought my house in Belmont Ridge 2 years before deployment. A quiet cul-de-sac, good schools, a yard for my daughter. Karen ran the HOA like a fiefdom. Fines for mailbox color. Fines for grass height. Fines for existing, some days. I kept my head down. Paid every fine, even the ones that made no sense, because I didn't want trouble before deployment. My wife Elena begged me to fight back once. I told her, pick your battles. I'm about to be gone for months. That decision would almost cost us everything. Karen had hated me since the day I put up a small American flag pole that was, apparently, 2 inches too tall. She sent code enforcement photos of my yard weekly. She once measured my grass with a ruler while I watched from the window. Elena said Karen looked at our house like she was owed something. I laughed it off then. I don't laugh now. 6 months into deployment, Elena called me, crying, saying trucks had shown up in our backyard with no warning. They said it's a retention pond, Elena told me. Karen said the HOA has an easement. She showed papers. I asked her to photograph everything. Elena, calm under pressure, always has been, started documenting instantly. 2 weeks later, our flat backyard was a crater. 3 weeks later, it had filled with runoff and become an actual lake. Karen called it a community drainage improvement. She told Elena it would raise everyone's property values. Except it wasn't community land. It was our land, deeded to us, paid off, surveyed and fenced. Karen knew that. Karen didn't make a mistake. She made a calculated bet that I wouldn't fight back. I called our lawyer from a satellite phone in a tent that smelled like dust and diesel, my hands shaking with rage. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Priya Nair, said one sentence that changed everything, Danny, this is not an accident. She pulled the county plat records. Our lot line was undisputed. The easement Karen waved around didn't exist. Priya said, Karen forged or misrepresented an easement to dig a retention pond on private land. That's not just a mistake. I remember sitting in that tent, staring at drone photos of my ruined yard, thinking of my daughter's swing set, now underwater. Elena told me Karen had smiled at her in the driveway and said, this will be good for everyone, dear. You'll thank me. I didn't sleep that night. Somewhere between rage and grief, I decided, when I get home, this ends in court. But first, I needed proof. Real proof. The kind that doesn't melt under a lawyer's cross-examination. Elena started a folder. Every HOA email. Every text from neighbors. Every contractor invoice she could get her hands on. She found the excavation company's business card stuck in our fence. First name on a growing list of witnesses. Karen didn't know it yet, but she had just started a war with a family that plans logistics for a living. Back home, my battalion's rear detachment helped Elena get in touch with a military legal assistance office for family support. They connected her to a civilian attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. Priya wasn't alone anymore. Elena discovered the excavation contract was signed under the HOA's name, not mine, dated while I was already overseas. That signature line would become the single most important piece of paper in the entire case. Karen, meanwhile, was busy telling the neighborhood a different story. That I had approved the drainage project remotely. Neighbors started looking at Elena differently. Some whispered that we must be hiding something if we were upset. That's Karen's genius, if you can call it that. She controls the narrative before anyone can question the facts. One neighbor, an older man named Walt, pulled Elena aside and whispered, "She did something like this before. Ask around." That single sentence would crack this case wide open, months later, in ways none of us expected. For now, Elena just nodded, smiled and kept collecting evidence, one quiet conversation at a time. I finished my deployment rotation still stuck overseas for 3 more months, watching this unfold through phone calls. Every video call, Elena would pan the camera to the lake, now home to actual ducks. Ducks. On my backyard. Karen posted in the community Facebook group that the pond was a beautiful addition approved by absent homeowners. She never used my name. She never had to. Everyone knew who the absent homeowner was. I read that post from a cot in a shipping container barracks and felt something in me go cold and very, very focused. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns out. What replaced it was patience, and patience is far more dangerous. I told Elena, "Don't respond publicly. Let her keep talking. Every post is more rope for her to hang herself with." Karen, it turned out, loved an audience. And an audience loves a villain who can't stop bragging. Priya filed an official records request with the county, asking for every permit associated with our address. The response took 3 weeks. When it came back, it contained a bombshell nobody in the HOA saw coming. There were no permits. Karen had authorized 6-figure excavation work on private land without a single county permit. Not stormwater. Not environmental. Not even a basic grading permit. Zero paperwork, entirely illegal by county code. Priya said, "This isn't a civil dispute anymore, Danny. This is a criminal exposure for her and a massive civil claim for you." I asked what massive meant. She said restoration, land value loss, legal fees and potential punitive damages combined. I didn't let myself hope yet. I'd seen HOA boards protect their own before. Karen had allies on that board. But Elena had something Karen didn't, a folder now 3 inches thick and a neighbor named Walt who remembered. Walt agreed to talk to Priya on record. What he said next would become Exhibit A in our entire case. Karen had done this before, 2 HOAs ago, in a different state, under a different maiden name. And the woman she'd done it to had never fought back. I was about to become the exception to Karen's rule. Walt sat across from Priya's paralegal with a manila folder of his own, older, yellowed, kept for over a decade. "I moved here after that mess in Charleston," Walt said. Karen Whitfield was Karen Doss back then. Same tricks. In Charleston, Karen had allegedly rerouted a drainage swale onto a widow's property to fix flooding near the clubhouse. The widow, elderly and without resources, had simply moved away rather than fight the HOA's legal fund. Walt had kept newsletters, meeting minutes, even a newspaper clipping about the dispute, because it never sat right with him. Priya's eyes lit up reading it. This shows pattern and intent. This isn't incompetence. This is a method. I got that news on a video call at 2 a.m. local time and actually laughed out loud in an empty tent. "She's done this before," I told my battle buddy, Sergeant M.O. Castillo, who just shook his head and said, "Some people never learn." M.O., it turned out, had a cousin who worked in land surveying back in Georgia. Small world, big help. His cousin agreed to do an independent survey of my property to establish, beyond doubt, exactly where the lake now sat. The survey confirmed it, 70% of the excavation was entirely inside my deeded property line. The remaining 30% bled into a common area, meaning Karen had damaged HOA land too, without board approval. That detail mattered more than I realized. It meant even her own board members were victims of her decision. Priya requested the full HOA board meeting minutes from the months surrounding the excavation project's approval. What came back showed something stunning: there had been no formal board vote authorizing the pond at all. Karen had used her emergency authority clause, meant for genuine crises, to bulldoze the decision through alone. One board member, a quiet accountant named Fong, had actually voted against it in an email Karen had buried. Phone hadn't spoken up publicly. He was afraid of Karen's retaliation, the same fines and harassment I knew too well. Priya reached out to him gently, explaining he could be a witness, not a target, if he came forward now. Phone agreed, on one condition, that his statement wouldn't surface until the lawsuit was formally filed, for his safety. We had a forged narrative, an illegal permit gap, a documented pattern of past abuse and a silenced board insider. Karen, blissfully unaware how deep this had gotten, kept posting duck photos with captions like "Nature thanks US." Meanwhile, my deployment orders shifted. I was told I'd be home 2 months earlier than expected. Perfect timing. I called Elena and said only, "Don't tell Karen I'm coming back early. Let her keep talking." Elena agreed, though she admitted the stress was wearing on her, managing a lake and a lawsuit and a toddler alone. I felt the guilt of being gone crash into me sitting in that tent, but I reminded myself, this fight was almost over. Priya filed a formal demand letter to the HOA board, citing trespass, property damage and violation of association bylaws. Karen's response was pure Karen. She called an emergency board meeting and framed herself as the victim of harassment. She told the board that my family was trying to profit off a beautiful community improvement out of pure greed. That framing worked on some neighbors. It did not work on Fong, who now had documents proving otherwise. The demand letter set a 30-day deadline for the HOA to respond with a restoration plan or face formal litigation. Karen ignored it. She told the board attorney the claim was frivolous and that the family would back down. She had no idea Priya had already built a paper trail spanning 2 states and over a decade of pattern behavior. Day 28 of the deadline, Karen made her first real mistake since this whole nightmare began. She posted publicly that certain deployed homeowners were using their military status to bully a volunteer board. That post, screenshot instantly by 3 separate neighbors, would end up printed and highlighted in a courtroom exhibit. Using someone's deployment against them isn't just tasteless. In some jurisdictions, it edges toward legally relevant misconduct. Priya smiled reading it. She just handed us a sympathy narrative and a credibility problem, all in one post. My command back home heard about the situation through a family readiness liaison and offered legal support resources. For the first time since this began, I felt like the system, the actual system, might finally be on our side. The 30-day deadline passed with no restoration plan, no apology and no acknowledgement from the HOA board. Priya filed the lawsuit the very next morning: trespass, property damage, breach of fiduciary duty and gross negligence. The complaint named both the HOA Association and Karen Whitfield personally, which her own bylaws didn't fully protect her from. Karen, it turned out, hadn't followed the association's insurance notification procedures either. Another gap. Another opening. Her homeowner association's insurer refused to cover the claim, citing failure to follow reporting protocols within policy deadlines. That meant if we won, Karen herself, not just the HOA's fund, could be personally on the hook for damages. News of the lawsuit spread through Belmont Ridge faster than the lake had spread through my backyard. Some neighbors reached out privately to Elena, admitting they'd been afraid to challenge Karen for years. One woman, Priya later learned, had paid a $600 fine for unapproved patio furniture that never actually existed. Karen's harassment wasn't just my story. It was a pattern stitched through half the cul-de-sac, silent until now. Priya asked the court to consolidate discovery requests, meaning Karen would have to produce 5 years of HOA financial records. One that even Priya hadn't fully anticipated. Buried in an obscure HOA vendor account was a $22,000 payment to the excavation company routed before formal invoicing. Karen had paid contractors from association reserve funds before the project was even discussed at a board meeting. That wasn't just overreach. Depending on state law, that could constitute misappropriation of association funds. Phone, still cooperating quietly, confirmed he'd never seen that payment approved in any meeting he attended. I remember reading this update from a bunk bed on a transport flight home, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles ached. Elena picked me up from the airport and the first thing she said was, "Danny, it's bigger than we thought." Walking into my own backyard for the first time in months, I stood at the edge of the water that used to be grass. My daughter, 3 years old, pointed at a duck and said, "Look, Daddy, our pool." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That night, Elena and I sat at the kitchen table going through the growing case file, page by page, together. Priya called the next morning with an update. Karen had hired a high-priced litigation firm from Atlanta to defend her. "She's scared," Priya said. "People who think they're untouchable don't hire firms like that unless they finally feel exposed." Karen's lawyers tried an early motion to dismiss, arguing the HOA's governing documents gave broad discretion for improvements. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Alvarez, denied the motion in under 10 minutes during the hearing. Discretion, Judge Alvarez said, does not extend to excavating land you don't own without a single permit. That line, spoken flatly in open court, became something neighbors quoted to each other for weeks afterward. Karen tried a new strategy, settlement talks, offering $40,000 and a promise to landscape around the pond instead of removing it. I laughed reading the offer. $40,000 for a destroyed yard, a damaged reputation and half a year of stress. Priya recommended we reject it outright. Lowball offers early mean they're testing if you'll cave. Don't. We rejected it. Karen's lawyers came back a week later, this time offering $95,000, still refusing to admit fault. Elena wanted to accept, exhausted from months of this fight. I understood her completely and almost agreed. Then Priya shared something new, an independent environmental engineer's report on the actual damage to our land. The excavation had disrupted soil composition so severely that full restoration, not just filling the hole, would cost far more. Topsoil replacement, drainage correction, tree root damage and years of potential foundation risk to our home itself. The estimated true cost of proper restoration, $310,000. Karen's $95,000 offer wasn't even a third of the real damage. We rejected that offer too. Karen's attorneys, for the first time, sounded rattled during the next case conference call. Meanwhile, a local news reporter caught wind of the story through the community Facebook group screenshots circulating online. The headline ran, "HOA President turns deployed soldiers' backyard into a legal lake." It spread fast. Karen tried damage control, giving an interview claiming she was targeted by a disgruntled homeowner seeking a payday. That interview aired the same week Feng's sworn statement was formally entered into the court record. The reporter got a tip about Feng's statement and followed up, asking Karen directly about the unapproved emergency authority use. Karen refused to answer on camera, said no comment, and walked away, footage that ended up on every local news rerun. That clip alone did more damage to her public image than anything Elena or I had ever posted. Neighbors who once stayed quiet started speaking to the reporter too, describing years of selective fine enforcement. One family said Karen fined them for a unified mailbox violation the same week she approved her own different mailbox. The story wasn't about a lake anymore. It was about a pattern of unchecked power finally catching daylight. Karen's own board members, feeling the heat, called for an internal vote on whether to remove her as president. Feng, no longer silent, spoke at that meeting for the first time, describing the buried emergency authority vote. The board removed Karen as HOA president in a 6-1 vote. Karen herself cast the lone vote to stay. Losing the presidency didn't end her defense. If anything, Karen dug in harder, treating this as personal war now. Her attorneys filed a counterclaim, alleging Elena's Facebook comments about the lake constituted defamation against Karen. Priya wasn't worried. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation and everything Elena said is documented fact. The counterclaim was dismissed within 2 weeks, but it cost U.S. time, stress and additional legal fees along the way. That's when Priya requested formal discovery depositions, starting with the excavation company's owner, a man named Rick Talbot. Rick, under oath, admitted Karen had told him verbally that the homeowner already knows and is fine with it. That single sentence was a direct, provable lie, since I was overseas and had never spoken to Rick at all. Rick also testified Karen paid him partially in cash, off the books, to avoid a formal contract review by the board. That detail alone opened the door to potential fraud allegations layered on top of the civil trespass claim. Karen's deposition came next. Priya prepared for weeks, building a question sequence designed to expose the pattern methodically. Under oath, Karen initially claimed she believed an easement existed, citing old community documents she couldn't produce. Priya asked her to describe the documents. Karen's description didn't match any recorded plat, easement, or deed on file. Then Priya asked about Charleston. Karen's composure cracked visibly for the first time in the entire deposition. She claimed the Charleston situation was completely unrelated and a misunderstanding with an emotional elderly woman. Priya introduced Walt's documentation, the newspaper clipping and the old HOA newsletter as deposition exhibits. Karen's attorney objected repeatedly, but the pattern evidence was already on record, already speaking for itself. Karen then made a claim that would become the final, fatal thread in our entire case, almost by accident. She said, under oath, that she'd never personally profited from any HOA decision in her entire tenure as president. Priya smiled, because she already had the bank statement showing $22,000 routed to an excavation company Karen partly owned. Karen Whitfield was a 40% silent partner in Talbot Excavation Services, hidden under her maiden name, Doss. She hadn't just approved illegal excavation on my land. She had personally profited from paying herself for it. The deposition room went silent. Even Karen's own attorney looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. That single ownership record turned a property dispute into something resembling embezzlement and self-dealing fraud. Priya requested the deposition transcript be immediately forwarded to the county district attorney's office for review. A criminal investigation into Karen's HOA financial conduct opened 3 weeks later, separate from our civil suit. I remember getting that call from Priya standing in my kitchen, looking out at the lake that started all this. Danny, she said, this isn't just a strong case anymore. This might be one of the strongest I've seen in years. Karen's attorneys, sensing the walls closing in, requested an emergency settlement conference before the case reached trial. Priya recommended we attend, not to settle cheap, but to see exactly how desperate they'd become under pressure. We walked into that conference room knowing something Karen still didn't fully grasp: we held every card now. Karen's lead attorney opened with a number, $180,000, full restoration included, contingent on U.S. signing a strict non-disclosure agreement. I almost laughed at the non-disclosure clause. She wanted silence more than she wanted to save money, apparently. Priya countered flatly, $480,000, covering full restoration, legal fees, emotional distress and zero non-disclosure agreement whatsoever. The number stunned Karen's attorney. He asked for a recess. Karen, visible through the glass door, looked pale. During the recess, Priya explained her math: restoration costs, punitive exposure from the fraud discovery and reputational damages combined. They know a jury in this county, after that news story, will not be kind to her, Priya said quietly. When they returned, Karen's attorney tried $250,000. We didn't move an inch. Time was now entirely on our side. Priya reminded them the criminal investigation was ongoing and a civil settlement wouldn't shield Karen from that separately. Karen, for the first time in the entire ordeal, spoke directly to me across that conference table, voice shaking. "You're going to bankrupt me over a pond," she said. I answered calmly, "You bankrupted yourself over a lake you dug illegally." That line wasn't dramatic flair. It was simply true, and true things tend to land harder than anything scripted. Her attorney pulled her aside, whispered for several minutes, then returned with a final offer, $400,000, no non-disclosure clause required. Priya didn't blink. 480. Full stop. Or we see you and the criminal referral both in front of a jury. 20 silent minutes later, Karen's attorney nodded. $480,000. Full restoration. No gag order. Signed that same afternoon. Karen signed last, her hand visibly trembling, refusing to make eye contact with either Elena or me across the table. As she stood to leave, she muttered, just loud enough for us to hear, "This still isn't over." Priya, unfazed, replied, "Actually, IT very much is. And the DA's office would like a word with you next. We walked out of that building into ordinary Georgia sunlight, and for the first time in nearly a year, I exhaled fully. Elena squeezed my hand and said, "We did it. We actually did it." I didn't trust myself to say anything back yet. That night, we stood at the edge of the fake lake together, watching ducks glide across water that would soon be gone. Restoration crews arrived within 2 weeks, funded entirely by the settlement, exactly as the agreement specified. They drained the water first, slowly, to avoid further soil disruption, following the environmental engineer's careful plan. Watching that lake shrink day by day felt like watching a wound finally, actually, start to close for good. Phone reached out privately to thank Elena, saying our case gave him the courage to stay involved in HOA reform efforts. He helped organize a new resident committee focused on transparency, term limits, and independent financial audits for the board. Walt showed up one afternoon while the crew worked, just to watch, arms crossed, quiet satisfaction on his face. "Somebody finally made her answer for it," he said. "Took over a decade, but somebody finally did." The county district attorney's office formally charged Karen with embezzlement and fraud related to the HOA's finances. The case, separate from ours but built partly on evidence our lawsuit uncovered, moved forward with its own momentum. Local news ran a follow-up story: HOA president faces criminal charges after illegal lake lawsuit exposed fraud. Karen resigned from the HOA entirely, sold her house within 2 months and left Belmont Ridge without a goodbye. Some neighbors said she moved 2 states away. Others said they didn't care where, as long as IT wasn't here. The new HOA board, with Phone now serving as treasurer, adopted stricter rules requiring board votes for any project over $500. My backyard restoration took 11 weeks total: soil replacement, drainage correction, sod, and a fresh survey to confirm boundaries. My daughter, now old enough to remember the pool, asked where the ducks went. I told her they found a new home. The empty crater slowly filled back in with clean fill dirt, layer by layer, under the engineer's supervision. We used part of the settlement to build an actual small fire pit and patio where the lake used to be, a place to reclaim. Elena said watching the yard turn green again felt like watching us get our life back, piece by piece. I came home from my next deployment cycle assignment briefing and told my commander the whole story, half expecting disbelief. He just shook his head and said, "Some people think deployed families are easy targets. Glad this one wasn't." Priya later told HOA Karens' criminal case ended in a plea deal, restitution to the HOA and a permanent board service ban. No jail time, which frustrated Elena at first, until Priya explained restitution plus public record exposure carries its own weight. Karen would never serve on another homeowners association board again, anywhere, for the rest of her life, by court order. Her name and the entire case remained searchable public record, permanently attached to any background check run on her. Walt joked that karma doesn't always show up with handcuffs. Sometimes it shows up as a permanently ruined reputation. Feng's new Transparency Committee published its first annual audit report, the first one Belmont Ridge had seen in 15 years. It listed every dollar spent, every vote taken, every project approved, in plain language anyone could understand. Neighbors who'd stayed silent for years started attending meetings again, asking questions they'd been too afraid to ask before. One of them, the woman fined for imaginary patio furniture, got her $600 refunded after the new board reviewed old records. I sat down with my daughter on our new patio one evening and told her, simply, that sometimes people try to take what isn't theirs. "But you fixed it, Daddy," she said. I told her, "We fixed it. Mommy fixed a lot of it while I was gone." Elena deserved every bit of credit for holding the line during the months I couldn't be there, documenting, waiting, fighting quietly. I think about Karen sometimes, not with anger anymore, mostly with a strange kind of disbelief at how far she pushed it. She had every chance to apologize, to fix it quietly, to admit fault before it became a public unraveling. Instead, she chose control, chose lies, chose profit over accountability, and it cost her everything she'd built. The $480,000 mattered, but honestly, watching that yard turn back to grass mattered more than any number on paper. Belmont Ridge isn't perfect now, no neighborhood ever is, but it's honest in a way it wasn't before. People vote at meetings now. People ask for receipts. People remember what happens when power goes unchecked too long. As for me, I planted a small tree exactly where the deepest part of that illegal lake used to be. It's growing steadily, roots going down where water once tried to erase what was always, legally, rightfully ours.